I wanted to briefly touch on some of the more technical aspects of the API types. Since we're using GWT in this class, it's likely that if you're looking at a client-side API for mashing up content, you're going to have to deal with JavaScript. And so GUID provides a JavaScript native interface that basically allows you to wrap any of the JavaScript methods in essentially Java. And basically allows you to do calls from the GWT code into those JavaScript libraries. So that's what I want to really say about client-side. Now we'll cover this stuff in more detail on Thursday as well. The proxy-style APIs are a lot easier to handle, and you'll find Java libraries for a lot of them. And basically, this is where you're going to request and republish content from third-party sites by doing a call to their services. And the form that most of the best APIs take is as a web service. And the example that's sort of, I think, perhaps the largest in terms of number of objects would be the AWS S3 service. And it basically allows you to, treat all of your web commands as being commands to, create, search for, index, and delete content on another website. And S3 is just, a very powerful API for managing any content that you don't want to manage yourself. So, if you have any content that you think is sort of secondary to your primary purpose, I highly recommend sort of looking into S3 as a way to manage that easily, because it's actually not that hard to migrate it from S3 if you decide otherwise later. So the scale-out slide that we had last class, I think, was perhaps the most popular one, and I'm hoping that this one will bring up a couple of interesting questions as well. But we've talked a little bit about all of this already, but definitely think about your search engine and the search engine crawlers as being kind of user number one on your website. And if you make your website really transparent and very easy to crawl, search engines really can make much better use of it. And know that a lot of the heuristics that are done for calculating search engine rankings are based on things like positioning, font sizes, and stuff like that. So make sure that the things you care about are positioned in the right places on web pages. Typically, top left. Have the appropriate font sizes for the information you want to communicate, etc. As far as if you're managing a lot of data, you can use Amazon S3 for media storage, for instance. It's a very, very easy way to present a lot of information to end users without having to deal with the headaches of storing and managing that data. And Amazon's been very good at adding additional APIs that allow that content to be cached and accessed more rapidly. Yeah.
So I know Google's App Engine stores Java objects in a separate server, and then all other media stuff in another server. How would Amazon's S3 compare to Google's approach?
Well, S3 is really a very basic storage engine, and you can actually store like images of an entire Linux distribution to run on another server within S3, but it doesn't do anything on S3. So S3 is a very passive file system type, and so you can put basically anything on it, but you're really managing it yourself. And I mean the easiest way for me to think, for me to sort of express how S3 works for me is that it's sort of like a server or a folder where I put all of my images or videos or something like that. So it's the folder where I don't necessarily put my HTML or whatever, but I put media content and stuff like that.
As far as like security sandboxes go, like I'm assuming Amazon makes it pretty easy to say that any content requested from from the user definitely requests content from your main site, which would happen to be App Engine or whatever you want to use, and then it would request content from Amazon S3. I'm assuming it makes it decently easy to.
Well, yeah. So the reason I think S3 is great for things like media, like images or videos and stuff like that, is if you intend that information to be public. It's basically just a web request for like you would do for an image, but for any private data, S3 requires a user ID and a key to get in. So there is an appropriate level of security for any private data, but that can sort of make developing sites built around private data a little bit more complex. Yeah, and I've already mentioned that the Twitter APIs and Facebook Connect are really useful for building up your service initially. I put Open Social in brackets. Open Social is a very interesting concept. And I think as a small startup, the reason you might want to use Open Social is if you intend your service to be a place where a lot of users congregate, and you intend to actually eventually become a server of identities. So if you intend your site to really be a hub with lots of users and that will go to other sites, then I would investigate Open Social. But it's not currently super practical for building the user base on your site, although that may change over time.
What is a CloudFront?
So CloudFront is basically a terrific front end that Amazon's put together for S3 that allows your content to be cached much closer to the users who may end up seeing it. So if you're running a site like Flickr, which has millions of images, those images can get cached at servers that are much closer to, physically closer, or network hop closer to the user who's actually going to see them. And the reason it's actually quite useful is that it doesn't incur additional bandwidth fees if you're already hosting your data on S3. And yeah, so one of the toughest things to do as your service becomes really popular, if you're getting into the millions of users and all of a sudden you've become the 10th most popular site in Indonesia or something like that, all of a sudden there's a lot of bandwidth requirements that for your data to move across, and investigating things like content distribution networks becomes really interesting, or working together with network providers to do peering arrangements where you get a lot of free bandwidth. So those are IT problems that you're going to have if you're very successful, and